In today's technical interview challenge, CodePath.org co founder and chief learning officer Tim Lee presents interviewee V with a double challenge, both pronouncing and solving a strobogrammatic number problem. Along the way, V shares how she prepares for technical interviews such as this one, and Tim discusses the unintended yet stressful side effects of the technical interview context. We encourage you to code along with V as she tackles the strobogrammatic number challenge and see how you stack up against the 5 most common technical interview performance criteria that today's biggest tech firms evaluate candidates against.
Welcome to the Interview Challenge. I'm Tim Lee, and I've been an engineer for over 15 years. But more importantly, I've coached hundreds of students through the process of conquering the technical interview. Now, real interviews, they're timed events. So in this interview challenge, our interviewee today will only have 30 minutes to finish their interview. And it's not just enough to code the solution. Interviewees will be judged on 5 criteria: communication, planning, coding, analysis, and speed. Why these criteria? Have you ever wondered what goes on behind the scenes after you finished your interview? It's going to vary by company, but they always assemble a hiring panel. And so, for example, Google will assemble people who participated in your interview, as well as people who did not participate in your interview. And then together, they discuss your performance across these 5 criteria equally. So most students make the mistake of only focusing on the coding aspect of their performance. So we want to consider the other dimensions as well. Once we get started, I encourage you to try to code along with us and see how you would do. So let's meet our interviewee today, V. V, thanks for doing this with us. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm V. I'm a rising junior at New York University, majoring in computer science. I am looking to go into software engineering, mainly back-end roles upon graduation, but I also do have some experience in data science.
So yeah, if you're ready, let's get started with the problem. So we're gonna have 30 minutes. So I'll kind of start the clock right now. And so we'll dig into this question. So I've shared it with you on REPL in Python. So the problem is, given a number represented as a string, return true if the number is this weird thing called strobogrammatic, which I had never heard of before I saw this problem, but it looks really fun. So it's really similar to a palindrome. It's the same going forward and backwards, but when it's flipped upside down. So you have a couple examples here of things that are true or false, like 69, when you flip it upside down, is still the same number. 88 is as well. 962, if you flip it upside down, isn't even a number. And the number 1, if you flip it upside down, is still a 1. Any questions about this question?
So I'm just returning either true or false, right?
That's
wanted
right.
to make sure. Okay, so a question I always ask is, should I expect any kind of broken or invalid inputs? Will you suddenly give me like a node instead of a string?
That's a great question. Like, what kind of invalid inputs are you thinking about?
In general, anything that is not a string of numbers.
Let's assume that you will have a string of numbers and they'll be valid positive numbers. So in other words, it won't be a number that's like 0, 0, 0. But it'll be a number that there's no leading zeros, but it'll be a number like 1, 2, 3. It'll be a positive integer, 0 or positive.
Okay, that makes sense. And will I get like an empty string? Should I account for that?
Let's assume that you might get an empty string.
Okay, and so if I do get an empty string, is that true or false?
Let's say that it's true, because I think if I flip nothing upside down, it's still nothing.
Okay, and then I just want to note that really quickly as well. So example 5 would be an input of an empty string and an output is true. Okay, then those are all the questions I have for now. I will ask more if they come to me. So I think off the bat, something that I'm noticing is that just looking at single digits, there are some that are by themselves strobogrammatic and there are some that are not. So I think an important step in me deciding whether or not a number is strobogrammatic is deciding whether each individual digit is or not. So it seems to me that 1 is, 2 is not. And please stop me if I say anything wrong here.
Yeah, no.
Or like that's definitionally wrong. Yeah. So 3 is also not. It looks like 4 is also not. 5. Oh, right. Because a number by itself can be so a digit by itself might not be strobogrammatic in that if you flip a 6 around, it is not, it's a 9, right? So it's not strobogrammatic because it doesn't look the same, but in a 69 it would, because those flip around. So I want to account for that as well. So 6s and 9s seem to be kind of a special case because they're each other when they're flipped around, whereas a 1 it's itself, an 8 it's itself, and a 0 is itself. Whereas 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s, if you flip them around, they're not really numbers anymore. Okay, so is that all the digits? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So a 7, if you flip it around, is also not really a number. Okay, so then it seems that one thing I could do is look through the number. I look through each digit in the number, and by definition, if there is a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 7, then the number cannot be strobogrammatic because the moment that it's flipped around, those would become nonsensical, so to speak. Then I would want to think a little bit about positioning. So if there's none of these numbers, so let's say we have an 80, that doesn't mean that it's strobogrammatic because if we flip that around, it would be like a 0, 8, right? So I'm thinking, all right, so then I would treat this, I think, kind of like a palindrome, but obviously not equally, right? Because in A is not in A, so to speak. So if I see, let's say I see a 6, 8, 0, 8, 9. That is strobogrammatic. So what I'll do is I'll look at the ends and work inwards with a kind of 2-pointer situation. And if I see a 6, I want to match it with a 9. Similarly, if I see a 9, I want to match it with a 6. Whereas if I see an 8, a 0, or a 1, I want to match it with itself. And then when we reach the middle, sort of where the left and right pointers cross each other, if maybe I have a flag that says true, if it has not yet been marked false, then I can return true. So, right, let me pseudocode that up really quickly. So pseudocode says if empty string, I think this is an edge case that I want to get out of the way at the beginning. And then what happens is assign a left and right pointers. Assign left and right pointers. And then compare digits at each pointer. And so I'll call this like group 2, I guess, group 1 for simplicity while I pseudocode things up, and group 3. And so I'd probably store these numbers in maybe a hash table or something to make comparison a little bit easier. But I want to compare digits at each pointer. And so if digit is if either digit in group 2, I'm going to return false, right? Because those are the numbers, the digits that cannot be strobogrammatic by definition. And now if digits are in group 1 and equal, then I want to return true. Well, not return true. I want to continue. And similarly, if digits are in group 3 and analogous and they match, so to speak, then we also continue. Okay. And this will run while left is smaller than or equal to right. Yep. And so I think if I'm returning false in here, perhaps what happens when I exit the while loop is I return true at the end. So I think that makes sense. Would it be all right if I went ahead and coded this up?
Yeah, let's reflect on this plan a little bit. So, what would be the time complexity of this plan and space complexity?
Yeah. So time complexity would be O of n, where n is the number of digits in the initial string, so the number of characters kind of in the initial string. And space, depending on how specifically space would be constant either way, because even if I use the dictionary to store things, it would only ever have 10 digits. So constant space.
Okay, that sounds good. Sure, yeah, let's move forward with the implementation.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to create a function is strobogrammatic. Hope I spelled that right. Okay, is strobogrammatic number. And that is going to take in a string. I'll call it a string. A number is perhaps more apt. All right, so if the string does not exist, then I'm going to return false off the bat just to take care of that edge case. Otherwise, I'm going to assign a left and right pointer. So left is going to be 0 because we're starting at the 0th index, and right is going to be the length of the number minus 1. Yes, and because I'm not, so usually if I had to reassign things in the string, then I might read it into an array, because once you slice a string, you're creating a copy. But in this case, because we're only accessing each index of the string, I don't think that's necessary. Okay, so then while left is smaller than or equal to right, so while the pointers have not crossed each other, if number index left or number index right is in, and then at this point, I want to define a non-strobogrammatic group, which is a set of 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 in grammatic, then I'm returning false because that number cannot be strobogrammatic. Otherwise, well, else if number left is equal to number index right, and they are both self-strobogrammatic. I don't know if that's correct. Kind of just said it, but if they're
auto-strobogrammatic.
Yeah, if they're 1, 8, or 0. So I think I could add another set for that. Strobogrammatic. So that is 1, 8, 0. So if left is in auto strobogrammatic and left is equal to right, then we can continue more or less. And let me see. Right, so I could have a very kind of long elif clause here. I'm thinking if I want to break it up right now. So if left is in auto-strobogrammatic, another condition that we have, and I might refactor this really quickly after this to make sure that it's clean. But if number index left, well, here I'm checking for if left is 6 and right is 9, or if left is 9 and right is 6. And I'm thinking if a set is the best way to do it. If left is, well, equal to 6. Oh, one thing I'm just realizing is that these will not be integers, they will be strings. So I should account for that in my set as well. So I'm going to go through really quickly and put quotes on all of them. Okay. And there we go. All right, so back to this. If left is 6 and right is 9, 9, or let me put some parentheses around there just to make it cleaner, more obvious, I suppose. Or left is 9 and right is 6. Then these are the conditions for which we kind of just want to continue. So this is the same as, well. So I think what I will do is combine these together, but indent it. See if that makes it a little bit cleaner. So I can group these together, and this will be kind of the first case, right? The number matches itself, or the number is 6 and 9 or 9 and 6. Then in these cases, what I want to do is to just increment left and decrement right. And then we'll go through the while loop again. So at the end of all that, I want to return true, because if we get all the way through the string without returning false up to this point, it must mean that the number is strobogrammatic. All right. Yes. Oh, there's an issue here. I think I need to put a parentheses around the whole thing. Yeah. Okay. This is indented. All right. So would you like me to sort of take the test cases from before and run this on it?
Yeah, to me, the code looks faithful to your plan. So I think we maybe achieved that. So yeah, I'd love to have you walk me through the next step.
Okay. So then I will run this on all the strings that we had before, which are 69, 88, D8, 962. We had 1 and the empty string as well. And so for this one, we expect true. For this one, we also expect true. For this case, we expect false. This one should be true, and this one should also be true. All right. So I'll go ahead and pull the sidebar and run this. Okay, that's a problem. So I think what I want to do now is to make sure that we're not just returning false at the sort of first mark. So I'll go through what I'll do is go through and put in some print statements to make sure that we're entering each bit of the code that I want it to enter. So let's make this checkpoint 1. And another thing I'm interested in is how many iterations there are of this. So if it's actually going through anything before it returns false. So can call this checkpoint 2, I suppose. And finally, one thing I'm interested in is what left and right are. So print left is and then right. Okay, so I will run that again. So we are entering this point, which means that it's not an issue with the initial check. And then let's look at the case for 69. So left is 0 and right is 1, which is what I want it to be. And we enter this point and it looks like we're returning false here. So, that does not make sense to me. So I think what I'll do instead is print both the numbers that are being indexed to see if those are what I wanted them to be. So number index left and number index right. And for simplicity, I will comment out the rest because it does look like we are, oh, and this is true, my bad. Right, so if the number doesn't exist, we're returning true. But for simplicity, I'll comment out all the other test cases. So I can look at this one first. Okay. So if number, okay. So what is not making sense to me at this point is that I clearly have a 6 and a 9, and that non-Strabo grammatic does not have a 6 and a 9, but it seems that it's returning false anyway. So maybe just to check, I will also print the non-Strabo grammatic set.
In other words, you're surprised that it's even entering line 53 because you think you're expecting it to be in this else.
Yes, exactly. Give me a second. So one thing I am wondering is whether maybe some casting is happening that causes this number index left to be an integer because it's not printing with the quote marks. But at the same time, even if this is an integer, it shouldn't enter into this clause, right? Because it's not in the set. Oh, I know what's up. Okay, I am speaking in English, but I should encode in English if number index left is in non-Strabo grammatic or number index right is in non-Strabo grammatic. Yeah, that's what's up. There we go. And I think I should fix it. I probably keep this just in case. Okay, nice. So that does fix the first issue. I think now, because I was worried a little bit about the casting to integers potentially, because they weren't printing with quote marks, what I do want to do is test on 962 to see if, because that's the test case that this would fail if the casting were an issue. Okay, and it does come out as false, so it looks like the check is passing. So now I want to run it on all of the rest. Okay, so that is a true, true, false, true, true, like I expected. Right, we take out the print statements really quickly to clean up the code. And I believe the time and space complexity of the code are as I analyzed previously when I was looking at the pseudocode. So is there anything else you would like me to do?
Yeah, I have a question. So I see that it's working for these 5 test cases. How do I know that it works for a more robust set of test cases?
we don't. So I can go through and create a few more now, if you would like.
Sure.
Okay, so these I know work. I'm going to comment them out for now. And I want to go through and create a few that are perhaps a bit longer strings, one that's just really, really long, to make sure that it does still run for those. So yeah, I think I'll go through with 2 really long strings, one that's strobogrammatic and one that is not. So that could be, I don't know, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And then I go into the middle and add a bunch of 8s. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. That, a few more 8s, and then a couple more 6s and 9s, and maybe a couple of 1s in the middle to make sure that that works. I noticed another thing that wasn't tested in the set of 5 that I originally had was a number with an even length that was strobogrammatic. So just to make sure of that, I'm going to go through and put that into, sorry, not even. Wait, that was tested. Sorry, what was I thinking? I think I was just thinking of a longer digit in particular, but it does look like we have an even length one and then an odd length one. But just to make sure, I'll go in and put an odd one in there just to be sure. And then just one that's very long and not strobogrammatic. Okay. And let's see. I'm not sure that I can think of any more test cases unless you're looking for stuff that is an invalid input, so to speak.
No, I think this is good. So let me come and ask a final question to you, which is, do you have any other reflections on analyzing this solution from other perspectives? So like, how do you feel about this solution in general?
One thing I'm not too happy about is this line 53 to 54. I think the code is not quite as clean as it could be. And so something I might do is potentially even just split this into 2 different ELIF conditions and do the left and right separately, because that will indicate that it's meeting 2 different conditions rather than this just very long run-on statement.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. And when you said clean, can you elaborate on what you mean by clean?
So code that is readable, basically, right? Because when we write code, we write it once or twice, maybe, but numerous people who are not me will read it, presumably. And I would like them to understand that these are 2 different conditions that we're looking at. And so even if, you meet only one of the conditions, we do want to do the same thing, but just to make it clear that these are separate. That's the first, I suppose. Another thing might be to, oh, what happened there? Okay. Another thing I'm thinking about could potentially be putting in comments. So obviously, if I were writing for production code and I didn't have kind of a 30-minute limit, I'd be going through and writing comments on what specifically I'm doing. I do know that we want code to be kind of self-explanatory, ideally, but I think maybe a comment above this function about, what is a strobogrammatic number would probably help people who are coming across this for the first time. Yeah, I think those are the 2 main things I'm thinking about.
All right, great, excellent job, fantastic. So we'll give you the crowd out there is giving you a lot of virtual applause. Fantastic job. So interviews are stressful, aren't they? Like even no matter like the difficulty of the question, the interviews are stressful. So let me tell you one thing, which is that interviewing panels, in other words, when people gather after your interview to give you feedback to discuss your performance, they never talk about how V did under pressure. That's not a dynamic that we're interested in testing. So it's an unfortunate byproduct of the interview process. It's not part of the evaluation.
So how did V's performance stack up against the strobogrammatic number challenge? Let's take a look at the technical interview scorecard, which premier tech companies use to evaluate candidates against the 5 key criteria that they are looking for in new hires. According to Tim, V's communication was an emphatic 10 out of 10. Throughout the challenge, V gave voice to what she was thinking, which allowed Tim to understand her thought process and the various trade-offs being considered. This kind of transparency helps interviewers get a much better feel for how a candidate is likely to perform if they are hired. In terms of planning, V did great. She was able to quickly sketch out a viable plan in less than a minute, which helped her solve the challenge in the allotted time. And while she arguably missed an opportunity to detect and prevent some of the complexity she would later encounter during the coding phase, her plan was workable and led to a successful implementation. In the analysis phase, V really shined and was able to demonstrate how rigorously she could find issues with her solution. Tim awarded her mega bonus points for going beyond the time complexity of her solution and pointing out the lack of readability of her own code. This kind of critical self-awareness about potential issues in one's own solution is a huge win when it comes to helping interviewers feel confident about the future performance of a potential new hire. When it comes to coding, V's solution was a success, but did suffer from some undesirable complexity. So while she did successfully solve the strobogrammatic number challenge, interviewer Tim felt that her 3-bucket approach introduced some conceptual debt, and the use of multiple if statements exhibited a bit of a code smell. An alternative solution that leveraged a lookup table, which returns the corresponding upside-down version of any given single digit, if any, would have yielded a less complex solution that was much easier to read, verify, and maintain. And finally, in terms of speed, V succeeded in building a plan, coding the solution, and analyzing its performance and complexity within the 30 minutes that was allowed for this challenge.
That would have been a passing interview performance in most interviewing companies. V, how do you practice for interviews generally?
So I had a lot of help from CodePath's interview course, which I just finished over the summer. And so mainly for me, it's looking at specific types of, maybe if there's a specific area that I want to look at. So for example, recently I've been looking at dynamic programming problems, and I try to break it down into several kind of main techniques that usually tend to be used. Then I'll do a couple of questions from each technique to make sure that I really have the concept down. Yeah, and that I can code up the concept that I have in my head as well.
Any pro tips for students who are kind of just getting started with the interview practice process?
I think the main thing to remember is that, well, a lot of people end up stopping halfway throughout the process or the prep process because it's hard. And it is hard, right? I'm not about to sugarcoat it and pretend that it's easy, but if it were easy, everybody would do it. And I think it's worth remembering that this process is worth sticking with this process if breaking into the industry and into big tech is something that you really want to do. Yeah.
Did you have like a habit or ritual that worked for you to practice regularly, like whether it was first thing in the morning or before you went to bed, or how did you integrate it into your life?
Yeah, for me, it was mostly before I went to bed. So I'd spend about an hour and a half doing questions. I think another thing that really helped me as well was keeping like a physical, like written log of, okay, so today I did this question. How did it go? What was my sort of rough thought process throughout it? And if I solved it, what's a one-line description of how I did that?
Wow, that's great. Yeah, that's a great way to kind of train your brain and to reflect on like what went well and help you remember it better, to write it down in that way at the end as well. Any final like thoughts or reflections on your own performance?
I think I'm pretty happy for 30 minutes.
The timing is tight,
Not
right?
too bad. Yeah.
That's something that you just have to get used to, which is a lot of times these interviews, they actually even have 2 questions. A lot of students wonder, oh, hey, I got the question correct. Why didn't I get it? A lot of companies, they're trying to help you. They'll start with an easy warm-up question, which they would hope takes like 15 minutes. and then they'll have like either escalations. Like, for example, we ran out of time. I would have maybe asked you, hey, can you reflect on another plan that would have potentially simplified this? So they usually have a bank of like additional complexities to make something more challenging. And so those are, again, things that you unlock only if you go through it fast enough.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for doing this. And again, fantastic job.